Benvenute e benvenuti.
Welcome
Io sono
everyone.
Walter
I'm Walt
Ferri,
Ferry,
giornalista
tech journalist
tech
and
e
member of
membro di
Pixel
Pixel
Carbonara.
Carbonara. Oggi vi
Today I'm
propongo
bringing you an interview
un'intervista
with Ross
con
Scott,
Ross Scott,
the person who essentially
soggetto che di
started the
fatto ha
Stop
dato
Killing
il
Game
via al
movement,
movimento e poi
later turned into the
all'iniziativa
European
Stop Killing
initiative
Games.
Stop
Se
Destroying Video
l'iniziativa
Games.
non vi dice niente,
If the
basti
name doesn't ring
sapere
a
che
bell,
è un
it is a movement
movimento
that, on the
che su
international
livello
level, is
internazionale
fighting
sta
both
lottando a
through
livello normativo
information
e
and
legislativo
legislation to
perché
ensure
le
that video game
aziende di
companies
videogiochi
grant players full
concedano ai
access to the
videogiocatori
products they
l'accesso
purchase.
pieno del prodotto
Why
che
is that
comprano. Perché
necessary?
questa necessità? Perché in un
Because in a
mondo
world
in cui
increasingly oriented
siamo
towards live
sempre
services
circondati
and
da dei
games
live
that require constant
services
server
e
access,
dei giochi che richiedono l'accesso
once those
costante
servers are
ai
shut down,
server, nel momento in
the
cui questi
product
server
become
vengono spenti,
inaccessible.
il prodotto non è più accessibile.
The movement's
La
demand is to allow
richiesta di questo
players, through
movimento è
alternative
quella di
means, be it
permettere ai
peer-to-peer or
videogiocatori
hard
di accedervi
systems,
per via traverse, che possa
to
essere
be able to
peer-to-peer
keep playing,
o altri sistemi,
or
o in
otherwise,
alternativa di
to
risarcirli
compensate
una
them
volta
once
che il
the game
gioco
is
viene
taken
andato.
offline.
Ovviamente è una battaglia
Obviously,
in
is an
salita
uphill
e
battle.
in questo senso abbiamo
And for
voluto
this
fare la
reason, we
sedia
were
d'argento
eager
e
to speak
direttamente
directly
a
with
Ross,
Ross,
anche perché in questa settimana
especially
ci sono stati
since a lot of
evoluzioni
stuff happened in
importanti a
Europe this
livello
week.
europeo. Quindi,
So, without
senza
further
troppi
ado, here
preludi,
is the
ecco
interview.
che vi lascio all'intervista.
Enjoy.
Prego.
The event that started this whole Stop Killing Game movement was the closing of Ubisoft The Crew. But I was wondering, how long have you been thinking about doing something before that day?
For a long time, I kept hoping somebody else would handle this or regulars. Honestly, the thought has kind of concerned me maybe since the late 90s. But different, slightly different practice, but for like online only games, then it was kind of an evolution because first it was only for subscription based games, where you have to pay money every month. And then it gradually switched to just MMOs for the most part. And then it bled over into other genres. I tried raising, so it kind of kept creeping in. I kept hoping, the industry would wake up or self-correct itself or somebody would pass sensible laws, realize what's happening on it. I first tried to sort of take action on it in 2015, sort of trying to raise the alarm. Back then, it was a more naive approach because I thought at that time it was, I thought there was still some uh, plausibility that this was just management not realizing what they're doing with how the game's structured. And then if enough gamers said like, hey, please don't do this, please do it in a more responsible way, that might be enough to wake it up. That was completely pointless. For that, I was trying to get people to contact EA over the game Battleforge. No, actually, wait. I I mentioned it for Battleforge. I think then a year later, it was a more organized campaign to try and contact over the game Darkspore, which was another one that shut down. Actually, that one's still unplayable. And what from there, I started. I was still hoping that like if just enough noise got made on this, uh, then somebody who knew more what they're doing would step up and interact. For a while, I made a series of videos covering just how many games are being destroyed, and I wasn't able to keep up with it. Uh, Later, I made a much more focused video trying to get action on it, saying like, I could use help on this. It didn't really go anywhere. The crew represented the first real kind of opportunity to act on this, in my opinion, because it satisfied multiple requirements to maximize attention on this, which was one, it was a relatively large game. So it had like up to at least 12 million players total. So that meant even among my audience, there were still many people who might have a proof of purchase that they could send to a consumer agency about this. So whereas if it was a smaller game, there might only be like 12 or 20 people, and then the agency might just ignore it. The second issue was that it was by Ubisoft, which are located in France and subject to France's consumer laws and the EU's. Whereas, like before that, there was the game Overwatch, which was a much bigger game shutdown, but they're located in the United States, and I think their distributor might be in Switzerland, so outside the EU. I mean, like in the Europe, so that would have made it more complicated. And the third criteria was what I call a clean kill, in the sense that anyone can understand what happened. The customers could play the game, it was shut down, and no one can play it again. Whereas Overwatch is a good example. They shut down Overwatch, but then they launched Overwatch 2, made that free, and then gave owners of the original some bonuses in that. So a regulator who might not know anything about video games might look at that and say, "Oh, well, they're compensating the customer," and then so there'd be a chance of us missing the mark based on a technicality. So the crew, it just checked every box. So I knew it was. Actually, I was going to say, even then, I realized it could be years before we got another example that good, and it has been. There still hasn't been a game shut down that big that had those criteria. So from there, I also was doing a lot of research, seeing this as kind of my only chance to try and take action. The main the main goal originally was to get it before consumer protection agencies so they could decide if this is even legal, what's going on or not. But during that time, I also learned about government petitions and the European Citizens Initiative. So I figured we should just push everything forward all at the same time to try and use the momentum to make something happen.
Yeah, that's something is interesting. I mean, everything you just said is really connected about how the things evolved in Europe. But at the same time, Stop Killing Games is moving basically everywhere in the world. And even thinking about the European scale, I think is like a gargantuan task. Why you decided to move like everywhere from the States to Australia?
Well, I'm actually the States that's luck, what's happened there, or that's just us saying yes to opportunities that arose. I originally didn't think that was a possibility. We did research into it, but I thought the legal situation was too sort of consumer hostile to do in the United States. But we did do Australia at the same time. We also, I mean, well, France and Germany are in the European Union, but we also had government petition in the UK, Canada. We started to make progress on a lawsuit in Brazil, but we weren't able to get enough information, relevant information, in order to proceed forward with it. It's just the same mentality where I saw this. I've been I've been wishing this had been solved for about, by then 12 or 13 years. And I saw this as my only opportunity to do anything on this because I had tried, multiple failed attempts that just went nowhere. And I realized just how much resistance there was to it, because part of the problem isn't just industry resistance, is that existing laws aren't clear on this. Or I've compared it before to when Uber first started emerging. Governments weren't sure if these are taxis or these employees or these contractors who are driving. It's a similar situation where there are laws that pertain to this, but not to this exact situation. So it's kind of interpretive, and it seems like everything trying to attempt action previously just gets caught up in that, where, well, this isn't our problem, this is somebody else's problem. They say it's this department's problem. Nobody takes accountability for this in terms of whether it's legal or not. So we kind of needed that momentum to just get a spotlight on it.
In the States, companies try to defend themselves, saying that it would be impossible to keep video games alive forever because of licenses. Is it true?
It is, but there's a lot of nuance with that. Well, the first thing is the licenses, pretty much in any country, can't override the existing consumer laws. So you can write anything in a license, but how enforceable it is depends on what the laws are. Now, in the United States, it's I'm trying to think of how to say it. It mostly defers to that in almost all situations. There is an argument to be made that the terms that are used there are considered unconscionable, meaning that these that these terms just are unfair and should not be respected. The problem with that is even if the courts were to decide, like, okay, these terms that they laid out are unconscionable, that's a defensive maneuver, which means that all that would happen would say, okay, the company says you can't continue running the game, fine, you can continue running the game. But just having permission isn't enough for these types of games, because it's like, okay, fine, you're free to try to reverse engineer a server emulator. That takes years of work. Only handfuls of talented people are even capable of doing that. So it's like saying, oh yeah, you're free to build your own nuclear reactor. Vast majority of people can't do anything like that. So it kind of needs more protections than that. Now, with deferring to the licenses, it's the sort of thing that hasn't gone all the way to the federal level, but it's been adopted by multiple regions there. So I'm simplifying it a lot, but essentially the existing case law says something like uh, this. The very simple version is the courts looked at it and said, this stuff is very complicated, so we'll just go with whatever the contract term said, unless it's something really obvious that breaks consumer law. But the United States doesn't have nearly the same amount of consumer protection laws that you have in the EU and, or to a lesser extent, the UK. So it's very much an uphill battle. Pretty much every lawyer I've talked to said nothing less than like new legislation would solve this. So
In Europe, the movement Stop Killing Game became an initiative called Stop Destroying Video Games. So, would you kindly explain me why you changed the name?
well, the movement, it's the consumer movement, is Stop Killing Games. For the initiative, I think we were trying to get something more palatable, that since this was going to be an official, Stop Killing Games is just like a name for the movement. This was a more official initiative, so we tried to make it more, I guess, less. I wouldn't go as far as inflammatory, but sensational, I guess, to make it more targeted. Besides, that was a group decision. I mean, I helped organize people, putting people together for it, but I was never an official organizer because I was ineligible. I'm only a resident in the EU and not a citizen. I need to learn much more Polish for that.
Since we are talking about Europe, I think it's a good moment to speak a bit about what's going on in the European Union, since the whole situation is quite messy. I mean, you got quite a huge support. The initiative Video Games, Stop Destroying Video Games, got a huge support from the parliament. Then you arrived to the commission, and the commission basically trashed everything. So I was wondering, is there a way to make the commission change its mind, or to go around the commission, maybe through the trilogue? Also, we have to remember that maybe it's not really likely, since the commission got in touch with video game lobbies just before they formalized their negative decision.
Okay, well, you asked a few questions there. Right now, our plan is, since we have basically through luck and lots of work, especially from Moritz Katzner has been helping, we have gotten majority parliament support. So that's just sort of a half luck, half effort thing that's another new option that's emerged out of this. That wasn't part of the original plan, but we're certainly happy to go that route. So with parliament support, by coincidence, our issue is a very good fit for the Digital Fairness Act being passed that's the parliament can amend. So that's basically an alternate route we're going to be able to get in through there. You mentioned the trilogues, but as I understand it, the commission's power on the trilogues mostly ends if there's not much of a dispute between EU Parliament and EU Council. If there were big disagreements, then the EU Commission could come in and then start influencing things again. But if Parliament and Council are mostly in agreement, then that kind of nullifies the Commission's influence. Now, you were asking what, I guess, could change the Commission's mind, or it's in my opinion, now that I've seen the full process, it's in my opinion, there's literally nothing we could have said that would have changed their mind. No amount of evidence, no pointing out how this is their job. Like, I am a bit annoyed at them, not necessarily because they ruled against us, but because they didn't clarify anything. And it's also, they're at the same time saying the courts will handle this. Well, part of their charter is harmonization of policy across the EU. So if they're just saying send this to the courts, that's, well, let's say in France they rule that no, these are digital goods and those laws should apply to them. But in Germany they say, well, no, these aren't digital goods, but you need to inform people when the game will end when you buy it. And say Ireland says that no, that we feel like the customer was informed enough. These terms that are in the contracts, these other directives don't really apply to them. This could be three completely different rulings of this, and that's total. That, as I understand it, that's the commission's job, is to at least give guidelines or clarify how this should be interpreted, and they're not doing that. Like they give, I've gone through their answer. They mention many directives, but if you follow through what they're saying, they sometimes contradict each other, or they just lead to sort of a no man's land for how to interpret this. So, like, for example, they mention many times that there's, okay, well, a really good example. They refer multiple times to the duration of the contract. Well, the duration says it can end at any time for any reason. So there is no real duration of the contract. Now, you can argue, now the question would be, are those terms unfair? You know, because they mention other directives that apply to that against unfair terms, and they don't clarify that. They say that has to be handled by a case-by-case basis. Well, then that's going to fragment things. So that's kind of them not doing their job. So it's, I think there's nothing we could have said that would have influenced them, because we kept having to say the same things to them over and over again. Because we met with them in October, February. Let's see, do we have one in March? I can't remember if we have one in March or not, but we have one in. Well, that's right. We had the Parliament hearing in March, but in May we had a meeting with DG Connect with communicates to the commission, and it's like they're still hung up on like that we're asking for like endless support, or if a game has like car brands or record label music in it, then that means they can't continue it means users can't continue playing it, when that's not the case. That means the publisher can't continue selling it because the users are sub-licensees. So I can understand them being confused about it, but once it's been half a year and we're saying it for the third time, and they're, like you said, and they're meeting with the industry, you know, like a week and a half before our ruling, that kind of shows they're signaling where they're at on this.
Were you invited at that meeting?
No, in fact, I was officially barred from most of them. The only one I personally was able to attend was the one in May with DG Connect. I was invited for that one. We were, yeah, I think the invitation, I think there were 3 meetings that were invite. Again, if you count DG Connect. If you don't count that one, then there were 2. So.
You were talking about the amendments, and so not creating new laws, but changing the already existing one. At the same time, that part is wider, and it might touch different sides of this topic. So I was wondering, is there any chance that eventually creating amendments for video game will eventually apply also for any kind of digital assets like movies or music?
Well, yeah, we'll clarify, we're attempting both. We're attempting to get enforcement on existing laws and introduce new legislation. Enforcement on existing laws is kind of messier and takes much longer, but we'll take whatever we can get. It'd be better to have it targeted and be faster. To answer your question, I'm not sure for enforcing existing laws if it would extend to other areas. For new legislation, because the commission is essentially blocking us and forcing us to go through the Digital Fairness Act, that probably will get more broad. And I think there's a high probability it might cover also things like, movies or music or ebooks. I don't know if it would extend beyond that though. See, video games are almost a unique classification under the law, according to the European Court of Justice, is that because they're software, but they're also subject to many copyright laws because of the volume of copyrighted content in them, like art and music and so on. So the EU generally tries to see a balance of those things. I'd say the route it's going now, that's becoming more likely. We tried to keep it narrow to maximize our odds of it passing, but if we have more support in Parliament and they're more willing to push it through, if we expand, sure. We're not against more protections. We're just trying to maximize our odds of winning on this.
Now I'm going to ask you a painful question. I know you are putting a lot of energy in Stop Killing Games, and I see your target. I can fully understand that. But is there a way that winning this war will eventually push the industries to find a workaround and make things even worse?
No, for two reasons, or mostly no. For finding a workaround, well, there are a few sort of ways to evade it, but they become more expensive than not evading it, is essentially what it comes down to. Because, like, for example, it's unlikely we'll get protections for subscription games. So ones that you pay money every month, like World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy 14, because those kind of operate like normal services. So there's not really a consumer rights argument on those because they're informing the user exactly when they end. There would only be a preservation argument, which I think it's unlikely we would get protections on that. So you might think, oh, well, a way we can evade this is just make our game a subscription. Companies would have done that years ago if they thought they could make more money doing that. Because during the mid 2000s, that actually was happening because a whole bunch of companies were trying to get similar success of World of Warcraft and EverQuest. And what ended up happening to almost all of them is they either shut down or they went to a free-to-play model. It's only a handful that made it out of that. In fact, today, I think we've only been able to find, it's something like 12 games that are still operating on subscription fee. So this is an extremely small market of people who are willing to pay money every month for one game. So it's kind of market. So yeah, there could be a few more that pass that they think they can make it, but I think market forces are going to kind of constrain this, that it won't change the dynamics that much. Now let's see, another way they could evade it is not sell the game in the EU. And maybe a few companies could do that, like especially games that were kind of meant to be localized anyway. Like the countries I'm thinking of for that are ones like China, South Korea, or Japan. In some cases where they only intended to release them in their country anyway. There can be plenty of games, or maybe not plenty, but there's definitely been several games like that. Like I think the game Lost Ark, it was many years before it, entered the West. It was, for a long time, it was only in South Korea. So they could do that, but then missing out on the EU markets, or maybe in California too, that's a lot of money they're leaving out. Whereas the cost of having an end of life plan, especially if it's planned for from the beginning, is comparatively quite low. So it's like, well, we could miss out on millions in sales to save, let's say, let's go high. Let's say 50,000 euros so we could lose out on 20 million projected euros in profit to save 50,000 euros. I don't think that's going to happen. Or there would be constant pressure from investors to, just to get that other cost as low as possible. There's another part of your question. I forgot what it was.
You kind of told me everything I wanted to hear. Yet, in a way, I cannot help myself to fear that things might go even worse than they are right now.
In my opinion, we're already on the worst trajectory possible. So yes, it can get worse, but I don't think the trajectory can get worse. And an example I've given is, if you may remember the original Xbox One reveal. So not the final version, but what they initially came out with. And it was a device that if you had to connect to their servers every 24 hours or all your games would stop working. It has a surveillance device which can capture biometric data like your heartbeat, your temperature. You can sort of make out your body through your clothes or something like that. And it also uploads that data. That's also mandatory. Once support ended, there was no indicator. It was possible all your games would stop working. There was a lack of information on that. So I was thinking that sounds about as bad as it gets. I mean, for me, as someone who's a fan of games, basically games I like being destroyed, that and there's nothing I can do about it, and they keep your money, that's already about as bad as it gets. So I don't really see much to lose on that front. I mean, it's especially when I have like a sense of the dynamics. There's a lot of bluffing by the industry on this. We've especially seen that from the Entertainment Software Association in the United States, where they literally said that games that already exist today are impossible, like like again racing games with car brands. Once they shut down, customers can continue playing them. They just can't continue selling them. Well, they were trying to make it sound like, no, it's not even possible for customers to keep playing them. They just make up stuff. And I think there's a lot of bluffing by the industry that's going on with this. So, I mean, when people say, oh, it could get worse, how? I mean, how is it getting worse in a way that hasn't already been attempted?
I'll be blunt. I mean, my greatest fear about the whole stop killing game movement is that eventually, if you win this battle, the companies will be, let's say, forced, or at least they will use this battle as an excuse to translate everything in the direction of the live services. I mean, the direction is already that. They're already trying to do that. So this might be the good time to say, okay, we are not going to publish products anymore, but just services. So you have no right to ask for mm, access to a product you already bought.
Well, they're free to do that now, is my point.
Mhm.
It goes back to like the subscription service again. There was one, oh geez, I forgot the name of it. Uh, they're pretty rare when they happen, the subscription fee games. Companies would love to sell games as subscription services if they thought they can make more money. But what will happen is compare like a new game for let's say 60 euros versus one that's 10 euros a month. Well, what'll happen is unless the game is so amazing that it just makes all the customer base want to keep coming back again and again, you'll probably have the majority of your customer base play it for a month or two, then they quit. So they made 10 to 20 euro per customer. Meanwhile, if it was a game they sold new, just as a one-time purchase, they made 60 euros or whatever the reduced sale price is from each customer. So they just get more money that way. It it's really only games that were kind of in the right, most of the games that are in the right place at the right time, or just have a fanatical fan base that you can kind of get away with the subscription fees. So again, I think market forces would keep it in check, and the history of MMOs kind of backs that up too. This is more than just theory. We've seen this happen once already.
Well, Ross, I think we touched all the main topics for today. Is there anything else you want to add to this discussion?
I think we're going to win in the long term. I'm optimistic about us getting into the Digital Fairness Act, but even if that were to fail, we still have, I think once this makes its way through the courts, just from existing laws, I think the current practice is so hostile to consumers that this eventually gets sorted out. The thing is that could take many more years than where we are now. So we're hoping for the faster option, but like in France, there's currently a lawsuit going on against Ubisoft about this, but I think I think the consumer agency there, the DGCCRF, is likely to bring forth a lawsuit against Ubisoft also. So not that this is all about Ubisoft, but that serves as a model for, all the other companies that if Ubisoft can go down over this, that's like a warning to all the others that it's gonna happen. So
Ross, I know you're super busy, so thank you for your time. Thank you for being here and have a great evening.
you too.
Se siete arrivati fino a
If
questo
you've made
punto
it
del
this
video,
far
vi
into the video,
ringrazio.
thank you.
Mi
I
auguro
hope
che
you
l'abbiate
find it
trovato
interesting.
interessante e
And
colgo
I'd like to
l'occasione
take
per
the
segnalarvi
opportunity to
che
mention that the
quarto
fourth episode
episodio
of Pixel
di Pixel
Carbonara is
Carbonara
entirely
è
focused on
completamente
Stop Killing
incentrato
Games topic.
sull'argomento Stop Killing
So,
Games. Quindi, se
if you
volete
want to deep
approfondire o
dive
rinfrescarvi
or
l'idea
refresh your
su cosa
idea
stia
about what's happening,
succedendo in quel
just
settore lì,
follow us.
basta che ci seguiate.
In the
Nel
meantime,
frattempo,
stay
mi
crispy.
raccomando, rimanete croccanti.